بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. As we are approaching the final stage and final week of this semester, so inshallah we are going to talk today about chapter 15 that is titled IT Security Controls, Plans and Procedures. Actually, it is a further step, an advanced step that usually follow what we have discussed in chapter 14, in the last chapter. Chapter 14 focused on the first step and half of the second step, that is regarding the prioritizing the risks, responding to the risks, determining how we are gonna treat specific risks, whether accept, avoid, reduce likelihood, reduce vulnerabilities or consequences, and share or transfer. Okay, in this chapter we will start with selecting the controls, developing an implementation plan, implement selected controls, and monitor the risks. Let's start with defining the security control. The control first, in general, is an action, device, procedure, or other measures that reduces risk by eliminating or preventing a security violation, by minimizing the harm it can cause, or by discovering and reporting it to enable corrective actions. All the way of the chapters in this semester, we covered those three, and we mentioned that they are the main goals of any countermeasure, any control, any safeguard, any control. All of them usually refer to the same concept. So it can be an action, it can be a device, it can be a policy or procedure. Okay, for what? First, trying to eliminate, prevent. Second, if this is the prevention, if the prevention is not possible, so to minimize, reduce the harm that can be caused by that risk. Or the third one, which is the least preferred one, is to discover, to detect it, so response actions can be taken accordingly. As we saw on this definition, that the controls can be categorized or classed into one of these classes. It can be managerial control, operational controls, or technical controls. If we talk about the management or managerial controls, again, use your common sense. From the title, it is those controls that come from the management perspective. Usually they are related to security policies, procedures, goals, either strategic or short-term ones, and so on. Mission, vision. Okay, so in order to reduce some risks, for example, we need to change our policy. We need to change maybe our mission. Okay, the second class of the controls is the operational. So it is not related to the decisions need to be taken by the top management, like the management controls, and it is not related purely to technical controls like softwares or hardware, that is in the third class, technical controls, but it is rather related to the mechanisms of the implementation. We have policies, for example, from the management perspective, and mission, goals, but here how we are going to implement them, we need to consider this and do some changes, or we need to put some of the control from this perspective. Usually it is more related to people rather than related to software or hardware devices, like on the third one, the technical controls. So the operational, usually it is related to the staff, the people, rather than the systems, like changing, for example, the attitude of the staff by raising their awareness about a specific security issue, or about how they are supposed to deal with some procedures, what are the precautions that they need to do, even even providing the staff with training about how they are supposed to use specific devices or systems that we are running or we are planning to adopt, to acquire. Okay, the third one, technical controls, as we have just mentioned, that it is related to those controls that purely technical or related to systems, either from software or hardware perspective, like limiting, for example, the access to specific systems, to specific or predetermined staff or positions, and so on. Having, for example, or imposing multi or two or multi-factor authentication. So we need to have a system for that. Or maybe if we are considering biometrics or token, in addition to the knowledge-based authentication factor, we need probably to buy either sensors for the biometrics or tokens devices for the token-based one. Okay, so these are some examples of the technical security control. They can come from any type of these or others. It can be authentication, it can be access control, it can be like backups for data restoring, it can be intrusion detection system, it can be like imposing or applying a cryptographic key management, and so on. These are examples about some controls, and they belong to which of these classes, of these three classes that we have just mentioned. For example, the risk assessment it is under management class. We have the awareness and training, it is under the operational class. The maintenance, again, under the operational class. Whereas access control, audit, and accountability, authentication are technical controls. These are some of the security controls and objectives that are stated or listed on ISO IEC 27002, that we can apply all or a group of them as controls to reduce or to treat risk or some risks that we may have or we have, such as the asset management, access control here, cryptography, supplier relations, information security, continuity, and compliance. As we said that usually there is no 100% secure system, so usually there will be a remaining risk or remaining risks that they are called residual risk from the word resident. Here this is the adjective residual risk, in other words the remaining risk. So as we have or we impose new or enhanced controls, the goal for these controls is to reduce a number of flaws, weaknesses or errors. After that reduction, we try to reduce the magnitude of the impact of the consequence of those risks. After applying all these, usually we will have remaining risks, residual risks. Either it can be from the same type of the risk, it's the same risks, but we reduced it, we mitigated it, and still, for example, the risk was 80%. Now we reduced it to be just 20% or 10%. Or it can be a new born risk that is not the same risk, but we covered a specific risk A, and we caused or we opened a bug or a weakness for another risk to be there, but it is less cost, it has less impact, less cost on our organization. So instead, for example, of having a risk that may cause us to lose 1 million real, we cover that risk, but we may put us at risk of another type that may cause us to lose 100,000, which is much more less than the first one. Okay, let's talk about the cost benefit analysis. While selecting any control, especially if we have a number of options, so we need to do or conduct cost benefit analysis in order to assess or evaluate the balance, the trade-off that we talked about it a number of times, about different aspects. Here, for example, we have to compare and contrast the cost of the loss that we may incur as an organization if that risk is exploited, how much we are gonna lose. On the other hand, what is the cost of the control that we are going to put in place to prevent or mitigate that risk? Okay, we can even think about whether to go more advanced on that. We need to consider it if it reduces the risk too much that we don't want to, for example, to prevent that risk 100%, because it is very unlikely. But if we reduce it by or to 0%, it will cost us 100,000 real, for example. But it is unlikely, very unlikely to happen. So why don't we, for example, implement a control that will reduce it to 10%, reduce the likelihood of the risk to 10%, but it will cost us only half amount of reducing it to 0%, which is, for example, that will cost us 50,000 real. Okay, or on the other hand, we need to consider to assess whether the risk will be okay, it will be reduced, but that reduction is not enough to put us on safe place. Okay, so this is the some of the matters that we need to consider regarding the cost of the risk and the cost of the security control of that risk. Usually it must show cost justified by the reduction of the risk. It has to be cost effective. It is usually the final decision after conducting this cost benefit analysis, the final decision of selecting one of the controls options is the business, the management, that they are responsible of taking that decision. Okay, after selecting a security control or security controls, we have to set an IT security plan that it will provide details of what will be done. These are the three questions: what will be done, what resources are needed to do so, and who is responsible of what. Okay, so the potential goal is to detail the actions needed to improve the identified decisions and identify deficiencies in the risk profile. It should include the identification of the risks, the recommended controls, and the action priority. Okay, then the selected controls and resources needed. The third one, the responsible personnel or departments for that implementation, and the implementation dates, and finally the maintenance. Let's see an example of the implementation plan of an IT security implementation plan. This is an example. For example, the risk is a hacker attack. The level of the risk is high. Recommended controls is disabling external telnet access, use detailed auditing of privileged command use, set backup strategy for router configuration file, and so on. The priority is high to the organization. The selected controls is to strengthen access authentication and install intrusion detection software. Okay, so what are the required resources to do so? In terms of time, for example, here we need 3 days of IT network administrators to change and verify the router configuration and write the policies, and we need 1 day for training of network administrative staff. Who is responsible? The responsible personnel is John Doe, for example, from this department or this team. The start and end date of doing this is from this date to this date. Other comments here for the maintenance required. Need periodic test and review of configuration and policy use. Here we can even state the specific periodic review timeline, for example, every month or every quarter and so on. So generally, as we saw, that a security plan implementation has an IT security plan documents, identified personnel, and when the implementation is completed, and to what extent that it will be operated. The further step that we talked about and we mentioned briefly, the security training and awareness. After we have identified the risks, and then we have identified the options of the controls, then we have selected them, we have determined the resources required, and then we have assigned the responsible personnel and the maintenance needed. Now we need to raise the technical skills of the team and the awareness of the general public of the organization. So the responsible personnel needs training on details of the design, implementation, technical staff, and so on. And we have also to raise the general awareness for all staff from the top management to the security guard even. Okay, at all levels of the organization. The implementation follow-up, the security management in a cyclic process, in a periodic process. It is constantly repeated to respond to changes in the IT systems and the risk environment. It needs to monitor implemented controls, evaluate change of security implications, and so on. So the maintenance, it needs continued maintenance and monitoring of implemented controls. Why? In order to ensure continued correct functioning and appropriateness. So the main goal is to ensure that controls are performing well as required, as they are intended to. Okay, so the task: periodic review, upgrade of the controls to meet new requirements if there is any. The system changes to not impact controls. We don't want to put specific controls, but we don't have the proper system or even the proper system configurations needed for those controls to perform well as intended. And we need to address any new emerged threats or vulnerabilities. So we need to deal with them if the current controls are not covering them. The security compliance, it is somewhat a part of the maintenance, but with like a further step, like a further advancement, that it is more like an auditing. It is not just any normal review for maintenance, but it is like an auditing process to review security processes. Usually there is a set of like checklists, and the auditors or auditing team need to go through them one by one to verify whether they are there, they are functioning well and not. Maybe they are there but they are not functioning well, or maybe they are not there at all. For example, here, suitable policies and plans were created. Yes. Suitable selection of controls were chosen. Yes. They are maintained and used correctly. Yes, and so on. If no, this need to be raised to the responsible personnel or responsible department or even the top management in order to deal with the shortcomings, the deficiencies. So it is usually part of a wider general audit. These are the changes that might be needed for the configuration or for the controls. And that's it. So we talked in this chapter about the IT security management implementation, the security controls and their classes, the IT security plan implementation of those controls, the monitoring of the risks, maintenance